Hello there, friends. Tonight, we're taking a trip back in time together, to a period that's often mistakenly seen through rose-colored glasses as a fairy tale. But the truth is, it was frequently a time of immense hardship. Imagine waking up in a medieval village. The first slivers of sunlight sneak through the gaps in your old wooden walls. Your first feeling is likely a sharp pain in your back, where the straw from your mattress is poking you. Forget about the luxury of a soft pillow. You're stuck with a coarse, scratchy cloth that smells strongly of goat, like one just spent the night with you. And don't even dream of a hot shower or a delicious cup of coffee to start your day. An alarm clock? Not a chance. The rooster's crow and the pungent smell of the cooking fire are your rude awakenings, signaling the start of a long and tiring day. A modern traveler like yourself would probably struggle to make it to lunchtime. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to my channel. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing, of course. And don't be shy about leaving a comment and letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I'm always interested to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights just a little, turn on the fan for a gentle breeze, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You wake up on what barely qualifies as a bed, just a pile of straw. The shaky wooden planks beneath you creak with every move you make. The morning air isn't exactly refreshing. Maybe the fire in the hearth went out during the night, leaving you shivering in a small, windowless room, shared with several family members and maybe even a chicken casually perched on your leg. No bedsheets, no pillows, and definitely no curtains to keep out the harsh sunlight. Just a few weak rays of light sneaking through the cracks in the roof, and someone coughing loudly on the other side of the wall. It could be your grandmother, your grandfather, or both. It's hard to tell since they're sleeping so close by. You sit up, rub the sleep from your eyes, stretch, and quickly pull your hand back after getting poked by a stray piece of straw. Good morning, Middle Ages. As you fumble around for your worn-out leather shoes, if you're lucky enough to still have a pair, your foot bumps against a chamber pot hidden under the bed. Yes, this was an essential part of the convenient life back then. People didn't go outside to use the bathroom at night. They used a chamber pot. And it usually wouldn't be emptied until someone remembered to do it, which sometimes never happened. You put on your rough linen shirt, which probably hasn't been washed since the last village festival. It has a faint smell of old sweet potatoes. But you're not much different from anyone else, since the idea of changing clothes every day is a luxury. One outfit is worn for a week or even a month. If something starts to smell a little funky, you just sprinkle some herbs on your clothes and move on. Outside, the morning mist hangs heavy over the village, and the cold air seeps into every little gap in your clothing. The dirt road is still muddy from the rain yesterday. You step out of the house, carefully avoiding a fresh pile of cow dung. Someone must have forgotten to take the cows to the field this morning. The small village where you live is made up of only a few dozen houses, with roofs covered in grass or wood. In the center of the village is a common well, and nearby is the house of the village elder, which has a real wooden door instead of a makeshift hanging sheet. That's considered quite the luxury for the time. The sound of a hammer rings out from the blacksmith's shop, and somewhere a child's cry echoes from a house. Life begins, and you still haven't had anything to eat. Breakfast, if there is one, is just a thin porridge made with well water and oatmeal or barley. No sugar, no milk, and definitely no stainless steel spoons. You eat with your hands or your own personal wooden spoon, which you carved yourself from a branch last winter. The drink is a weak homemade beer, because the well water is usually not very safe to drink. You start to feel your stomach rumbling. Too bad. There's no toast with butter, and definitely no morning coffee. Coffee wouldn't be introduced to Europe for almost 400 years. At this point, you start to wonder how people in the old days could put up with it. And the truth is, many people couldn't. The infant mortality rate was as high as 50%, and the average lifespan was only about 30 to 40 years. If you have a toothache, you just have to deal with it. There are no dentists, just the local medicine man, who is also a fortune teller and a healer using holy water. Some people say that the Middle Ages were romantic, rustic, and close to nature. Well, you'll definitely be very close to nature. Sleeping under a leaky roof, eating food from the garden, drinking water from the stream, and stepping in nature at least twice every morning. You go back inside, trying to mentally prepare yourself for the day ahead. Maybe today you'll have to grind barley at the village mill, or work in the fields, or cook for the whole family using the turnips and dried onions left over from last season. Whatever it is, you should hurry, because the day in the Middle Ages isn't very long. The sun is the only clock, and when it sets, the whole village will be plunged into darkness, with only the flickering candlelight and the sound of mice scurrying under the floorboards. You think getting dressed every morning is simple? In the Middle Ages, just getting dressed correctly and without causing any social problems is a difficult task. You open a small wooden chest, where you keep your wardrobe. No drawers, no hangers, and only two options: the outfit you wore yesterday and the outfit you wore the day before. Both smell strongly of sun-dried onions, with a few permanent mud stains of history thrown in. You choose the less smelly outfit, hoping the wind will blow in the opposite direction today. The coarse linen shirt, which reaches down to your thighs, is the first layer. No cotton, no stretch, no convenient zippers. Pulling the shirt over your head is quite a task, especially when you accidentally put it on backward and have to wiggle your arms out again. On the outside is a thick woolen tunic, as stiff as light armor. Keeps you warm, but the itching is almost unbearable. The pants, called breeches, are actually two separate pieces of fabric, tied around the waist and knees. It feels like wearing a skirt on each leg. The shoes are a sad story. Rough leather, thin soles, and no real difference between the left and right shoe. The first time you put them on, it feels like you're standing on two hard pieces of bread, and your feet are still wet from walking through the morning dew. As for socks, if you're lucky enough to have a pair that are still intact, hope that the mice haven't gnawed away the heel. You might think that at least the wealthy dress better. Well, they do have silks, lace, and metal-studded belts. But did you know that putting on a noble's outfit can take almost an hour? Just fastening all the bone buttons or tying all the garters is a serious morning workout. Some noble ladies can't even dress themselves. They need a specialized servant to lace their corsets, tie their headscarves, and attach their veils. Oh, and don't think that people were free to wear whatever they wanted. The Middle Ages had strict rules about clothing. If you're a peasant and dare to wear silk, you could be fined or publicly shamed in front of the whole village. Nobles weren't allowed to wear purple unless they were of royal blood. And who would dare to wear a hat taller than the priests? No one, unless they wanted to be considered a blasphemer. Some people even used scraps of fabric to pad their shoulders or hips to look fuller, because in those days, a round figure was a sign of wealth. And there you are, wearing 3 layers of clothing and still shivering, only because your wool got soaked in stream water yesterday. You step out of the house with your head wrapped in a messy scarf, looking like a haystack. You wonder why your head is itchier than usual today. The answer is simple: lice. You're very likely sharing your hair with a few uninvited guests. Of course, everyone does, so no one is surprised. Some nobles try to get rid of lice with perfume or floral powder. But for commoners, the most common approach is to accept living with them. Sometimes, people take a thin knife and scratch their scalp to ventilate it. Historians still debate whether this was a medical practice or just a superstition. Either way, it's not recommended that you try it at home. At this point, you're really missing your cotton pajamas, your soft hoodie, and the fresh smell from the washing machine. But be patient, because the day is still young, and you still haven't finished putting on your shoes. You bend down, trying to thread the lace through the stiff leather loop. Your hands are shaking from the cold. A rooster walks past, glancing at you with contempt. It looks like it had breakfast before you. Maybe it's judging your outfit, but who cares? You stand up, staggering a little because your pants are falling down. Time to tie them up again. 3rd time this morning, right? Not really, but there's no other option. Because no matter what you wear, work is waiting for you. And the only thing that can give you a break is the plague. But that's a story for another time. You've left the house, your head itching, your feet damp, your pants loose, and in front of you is the muddy road leading straight to the field. No morning coffee, no toast, no cheerful music. Just the wind, the smell of horse manure, and a job that you'll have to do for the rest of your life. You're a farmer, and that's the default fate of most people in the Middle Ages. Nearly 90% of the population lived in rural areas and worked in agriculture. Every day starts with going to the field before sunrise, when the dew still covers the path. First, you check on the sheep. Oh wait, the sheep were stolen last year, so now there's just a skinny goat and a stray chicken left. You arrive at the cultivated area, the plot of land your family has owned for 3 generations. It's about 50 meters long, narrow as a path, with heavy clay soil and full of rocks. No tractors, no sprinklers. Your tools are a curved hoe and a dull sickle, passed down from your great-grandfather. And then you hoe for 1 hour, 2 hours. Sweat runs down your back. Your hands are covered in blisters, but you don't stop. The sun rises high, and the flies begin to swarm, seeing you as an all-you-can-eat buffet. You smile a little, not because you're happy, but because you remember that today isn't tax day. Villagers usually have to give a portion of their crops to the local lord. This land tax isn't paid in money, but in rice, eggs, or piglets. In years of drought, when crops fail, people still have to pay in full or they'll be punished. The punishment could be losing their fields or even getting beaten. Interestingly, if you live near a forest, you can be fined for picking mushrooms. Because forests are usually owned by the nobility, and everything from wood and hairs to wild berries is considered their property. Eat mushrooms in the wrong place, and you'll have to explain yourself to the judge. Historians still debate whether medieval farmers really lived in constant misery. Some argue that they had joyful festivals, time to rest after the harvest, and close-knit village communities. Others point out that the average lifespan was only about 30 to 35 years, with most people dying from simple infections or common colds. You stop working for a minute to take a sip of water from your wooden gourd. The water is as cloudy as rice water, smells like iron, and has a slightly fishy taste. But it's the only thing that can stop you from passing out from dehydration. Clean water is a luxury. Most people drink weak beer, which is almost non-alcoholic, because at least it's been boiled during the brewing process. By lunchtime, there's no steak with grilled veggies, no wonton soup. You sit on the edge of the field, taking out a loaf of black bread that's as hard as a rock. You try to bite it and your teeth rattle. Luckily, today there's also a piece of old cheese. Old here means speckled with blue. You smell it, close your eyes, and eat it. As long as it's not crawling, it's still food. After a short break, you go back to work. This time, weeding and fertilizing by hand. Gloves. Well, gloves haven't been invented yet. The fertilizer is mainly animal manure, sometimes mixed with human urine. There's a reason why your clothes always have a unique fragrance. There's an interesting story that goes around. In some regions, people believe that if you sow seeds while singing a certain song, the harvest will be plentiful. No one remembers exactly what the song is, but everyone sings. One year, someone accidentally sang the song out of tune, and the harvest failed. That person later became a goose herder. The afternoon passes in exhaustion, but you don't get to rest yet. You still have to fix the fence, lock up the chickens, carry water, and help your wife re-roof the house that was blown away by the wind. It's starting to get dark. You trudge through the path back home, your feet numb from the cold mud water. A day has passed. You wonder if tomorrow will be any different from today? Then you smile a little. In the Middle Ages, there are only 2 kinds of days: workdays and market days, where you can trade turnips for dried fish or hear stories about the village who's suspected of turning into a cat. But market day is a story for the next part. You wake up the next morning with the same feeling as yesterday. That's probably because your bed is really just a pile of dry straw spread on the ground. A few bugs are crawling on your neck. A spider just fell from the ceiling near your cheek. You're not scared of them anymore. You call them your bedmates. But today is a special day. Not because it's a birthday. No one celebrates birthdays in the Middle Ages. Today is market day. You put on your best outfit, meaning the shirt with the fewest tears, and the leather shoes that have been patched for the 6th time. Your wife ties her hair with a red woolen thread, the only thing left from the shawl her mother gave her. The 2 children are quickly washed with well water. One protests, the other yawns, still sleepy. You put a few turnips, a jar of honey, and 3 chicken eggs in a hand-woven basket. Hopefully you can trade it for some salt or, if you're really lucky, a new roll of wool. You step onto the path leading to the market square. It's 2 kilometers on foot, through the dewy grass, past the neighbor's pigsty, and past the small shrine dedicated to the village's patron saint. Saint Mildred, who is said to have once made bread rise in the oven even without baking powder. The atmosphere at the market is completely different. There's the tempting smell of fried onions, the sound of chickens clucking, and the loud calls of merchants trying to sell their goods. You see a wine seller trying to get villagers to try wine made from expensive berries. A man in a rough cloth robe is performing with fire. A little boy is playing the lute, a stringed instrument, enthusiastically, even if he's a little out of tune. You pass a stall selling handwritten books. They're huge books, bound in leather and written in Latin which you can't understand. One has a picture of hell with a talking cat. You almost laugh, but you don't dare to. The bookseller looks very serious. You stop at an old woman's stall, selling medicine for everything from headaches and malaria to being dumped by a lover. She hands you a glass bottle containing a murky brown liquid and says, "Just drink 2 drops every morning and sing a folk song." You politely decline and move on. Interestingly, some medieval markets had very specific rules. For example, you couldn't sell rotten fish, you couldn't cheat on the weights, and you couldn't argue too loudly after the midday bell. If you caused trouble, the market guard would poke you with a long stick without any explanation. Historians still debate whether these markets were rare oases of democracy in that time. Some argue that, even though the nobility controlled most of the land and property, the market was a place where farmers, artisans, and travelers could interact, trade, and feel like they were part of society. Others point out that everything was still under strict control, from tax rates to who was allowed to set up a stall. You see a stall selling pottery, including earthenware bowls decorated with images of beetles. You ask the price, then quickly walk away when you find out that one bowl costs the equivalent of 20 eggs. You look at your basket of eggs and feel a little sad. Your wife finds a stall selling wool. You both agree to trade honey for wool. The seller smells it, tastes it, seems satisfied, and agrees. The deal is sealed with a nod and a quick handshake. A young man runs past shouting, "The storyteller is about to start." You pull your wife and children closer to the wooden platform in the middle of the square. A man in a moss-green robe, with a long beard and sparkling eyes, steps up. He tells a story about a knight who got lost in an enchanted forest, where a talking owl taught him how to find treasure by following the scent of rosemary. You smile. The children's eyes widen, and your wife nods slightly, as if she'd heard the story when she was a child. Some markets have a corner of sinners, where people who break the law are tied to a pole and have rotten vegetables thrown at them. It's a mild punishment, but humiliating. Today, luckily, no one is tied up, but a guy is being fined for sneaking a piece of cake without paying. His punishment is to sing a folk song in front of everyone. The more out of tune he is, the better. He sings. Everyone laughs. An old woman presses a real cake into his hand. As evening comes, you and your family pack up to return to the village. You didn't buy any salt, but you have wool. You didn't trade for a book, but you heard a story. And most importantly, you survived another day without being forced to sing a folk song in front of the crowd. You return home, tired after a busy market day, but nothing makes you feel safer than the quiet evenings in the countryside. Your house, with its thick earthen walls and sturdy thatched roof, is still there, sheltering you. But it also has enough holes for the cold wind to blow through. It's completely dark, and you light the only oil lamp in the house. The flickering light casts shadows on the rough and simple walls. No one needed much light, since there wasn't much to see beyond a few simple belongings. Your bed wasn't the cozy, cushioned haven you might be used to, but it was your home. And in the darkness, you felt safe within its shadowy corners. As you sat down, your wife started making dinner. As it did every day, your meal was simple. Barley, vegetables, maybe a bit of meat if you were lucky, and sometimes eggs. Today, there was also a little honey and some black bread. This was the typical bread in the Middle Ages, dense, filling, and not very sweet. Your wife handed you a bowl of vegetable soup. You picked up your spoon and looked into the flickering flames of the hearth. Meals were simple, but at least you had something to eat. Outside the window, you could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. You knew that in a city, no one could live like this for long. But you found comfort here. The Middle Ages were hard for many people. But once you got used to this way of life, you started to appreciate the beauty in simplicity. Dinner passed quietly. Family members ate without complaining about the lack of salt. Suddenly, your oldest child spoke up. "Mother, can I go to the market tomorrow?" His mother replied, "No, child. Tomorrow we'll all stay home and work." Life just kept repeating itself day after day. When dinner was over, it was time to clean up. Dishes were washed with cool well water and carefully put away. Taking care of what little you had was part of everyday life, and you lived without extravagance. As night fell, the family gathered around the warm hearth, sharing fairy tales, stories of brave knights, and legends about the saints who had protected their little village since ancient times. These stories were passed down through the generations, becoming living myths in this small community. Life in the Middle Ages wasn't easy, but it wasn't always filled with hardship either. Even though people argued about whether this simple life was worth living, deep down you felt a strange sense of peace. Even without modern things like the internet or television, you had real connections with your family and community. And sometimes that was all you needed. At that moment, you could hear the crickets chirping outside the window, and the stars in the night sky started to twinkle. You sighed softly, and slowly, the tiredness from a long day of work took over as you lay down on the soft straw mattress. You pulled a thin blanket over yourself, feeling the warmth spread, even though the blanket was a bit heavy from the wheat husks sticking to it. Tomorrow would be another day with chores and little worries. But for now, you just needed to relax and let life drift by gently and slowly. Even though life in this world was tough and sometimes lacking, you could still find peace in the silence of the night. The Middle Ages weren't an easy time to live in, but at least you could rest and enjoy a light and peaceful sleep. The new day started when the first rays of sunlight snuck through the cracks in the thatched roof. You woke up, feeling the cool morning air seeping through the gaps in the earthen walls. There was no alarm clock, but your body woke up on time automatically. That was partly because of the steady rhythm of life. As you stood up and went outside, it seemed the whole village was waking up with you. Your neighbors, most of whom were farmers, all had work to do from early morning. The first thing you did was go to the livestock pen, where the animals were eagerly waiting for their breakfast. You might have a few chickens, a small pig, or even some small cows. These animals were your livelihood, providing food and sometimes being used in trades with neighbors. But, for a medieval farmer, taking care of them wasn't always easy. A typical day might involve feeding them, changing their water, or even fattening them up if you planned to slaughter them for a holiday. While you were busy taking care of the livestock, you could see your neighbors were all busy with similar chores, but everyone had their own unique way of getting things done. One person used straw to line the floor of an animal pen, while another was busy milking cows. Every now and then, the village mothers would stop by to chat, animatedly discussing plans for the upcoming harvest or swapping gardening tips they'd picked up over the years. In that place, life unfolded organically, without any sense of urgency. Everyone knew they had a long day ahead of them and that they had to be ready for anything. After finishing your morning chores, you'd head back to your small house to have breakfast. It was as simple as any other meal you'd have during the day, nothing fancy, just quick and easy. Maybe some dark bread, cheese, and if you were lucky, a bit of fresh milk. Food wasn't always easy to come by in the Middle Ages, so having a decent breakfast was a real treat. Nothing special, but enough to give you the energy you'd need to tackle a hard day's work. As you ate, you could feel the peace and quiet of your cozy home, with its thick earthen walls and the crisp morning air. Now and then, you might hear kids giggling or neighbors chatting. But even then, everything was calm and quiet. Your day was pretty much planned out by farm work. You might have to go out to the fields to plow, harvest, or do whatever else was needed to keep the family fed. Those tasks often took up the whole day, but life still moved at a slow, simple pace. Even with the hard work and challenges, you could still find a little bit of joy in chatting with the other villagers, friends who were always happy to share stories and advice. And when the work was done, you'd go home to rest, ready to face another day in that never-ending cycle. You were used to that life even though it wasn't always easy, and you'd learn to fit in. And even though you were living in the Middle Ages, you never felt alone. You had your family, friends, and kind neighbors to share life with. The days were long and tiring, but you always found peace in them. The morning sun streamed through the small window, letting you know it was time to start another day. You'd slowly sit up, feeling a bit sore from all the hard work you'd done the day before. But that was just life, and there wasn't much time for rest. Everything revolved around farm work, from planting and taking care of crops to getting ready for the harvest. You'd step outside and take a deep breath of the fresh, cool morning air. Birds were chirping all over the garden, waking you up. The first thing you'd do was check the rice fields. The land wasn't always great, but a good harvest was always the hope. Rice didn't need too much attention, but some plants always died or got damaged. It was just part of farming back then, and you were used to it. Still, you'd carefully check each plant, looking for anything that seemed off and trying to protect the crop as best you could. Working like that, you really felt how connected people were to nature. The people in your village weren't just taking care of the land. They were also helping each other out with everything. They'd share gardening tips, tell old stories about monsters in the woods, or about brave knights fighting for what was right. Those stories were fun, but they also taught you about being strong and brave, especially when things were tough. Even though your life was mostly about farm work, you knew it was important to take breaks. Soon enough, it was noon, and you and your family would get together for a simple but nice meal. Maybe just a bowl of rice, some braised meat, and veggies from your garden. You'd eat slowly, taking your time, because life was slow in the quiet summer afternoons. Maybe we've forgotten how good it feels to slow down. There were no loud cars, no worries about work, just the sounds of nature and the people you loved. You didn't have fancy technology, but you had real connections with the people you cared about. Families didn't just live together. They worked together, sharing the good and the bad. After lunch, it was back to farm work, planting or getting things ready for the next day. You never knew how long it would take, but the day always seemed to fly by. You started to realize that even though life was hard, there were still plenty of peaceful moments that we often miss these days. As evening came, you could watch the sun go down, painting the sky with beautiful colors. You'd seen it a million times. You weren't rushing, there was no need to. It was just you and your family, and your friends in the village, enjoying the peace of the day. You'd look back at what you'd done and feel good about helping your family and the community. And then, when it got dark, you'd go back to your cozy house, where everything felt calm. The oil lamp flickered, lighting up the room, and you'd have a simple dinner. After working hard all day, you could feel it in your muscles. But it was a good kind of tired, a feeling of getting something done. You'd sit down and enjoy the quiet, getting ready for another day, another turn in the cycle. And when you closed your eyes at night, there were no city sounds, no texts, no bright lights. Darkness wasn't scary. It was just part of life. Your house would be quiet except for the little sounds from the critters outside, or maybe the mice running around in the walls. But you didn't worry about them. You'd learn to live with them. It was different from nights in the modern world, where you might go to sleep without ever really hearing the silence. Back then, you felt connected to nature and everything around you. You knew that night wasn't just for getting away from work. It was for resting and getting ready for what was ahead. You'd lie down, your body tired, but your mind surprisingly calm. You'd think about the day, the farm work, your friends in the village, and then drift off to sleep. A gentle breeze would come through the window, bringing the cool night air. You'd pull the blanket up and feel the warmth spreading through you. It was a great feeling, letting everything go. The light from the oil lamp would flicker in the room, not too bright or annoying. It was gentle, like waves lapping at the shore. You realized that even with the hardships, there were still wonderful moments to enjoy the peace. You couldn't help but think about the people who had lived before you, who had gone through tough times and still left behind stories that meant something. And now you were lying there, safe in your simple home, feeling life moving slowly, carrying you off to sleep. You were used to the long days, but you'd also learned how to relax and find peace on nights like those. You'd have good dreams, and the cycle would keep going. But not in a hurry or worried, just easy and free. In the days to come, you'd keep working in the fields, taking care of the animals, talking to friends and family. But you'd also always find those moments, those quiet times in the dark. And you'd realize that that was the most important part of the journey. Early in the morning, the birds would be chirping all over the village, but you'd still be asleep. That feeling, the quiet before everything got started, was one of the best parts of the day. You had a few more minutes to lie in bed, enjoying the peace, where everything was slow and easy. Every morning, you'd wake up feeling refreshed and excited about the new day. But you also knew that even though life was slow, everything still followed a cycle. Sometimes you'd feel weighed down. Farm work, taking care of your family, and everything else could feel like a burden. There were times when you wondered if you could keep going like that forever. But life back then didn't leave room for worrying. You didn't have time to think about the future. Today was all that mattered. And as you stepped outside to start working, you felt confident in every step you took. It wasn't about being cocky, it was about knowing what you were doing. You were working for yourself, your family, and your friends in the village. Every rice plant, every vegetable in the garden was the result of hard work. You knew that if you didn't take care of them, they wouldn't grow and you wouldn't have a good harvest. So the work was never easy. But it was also because of that hard work that you felt like you'd really accomplished something. It was like a reward that you couldn't find anywhere else. It also made you realize that life didn't always have to be a rush. Each day, you learned to appreciate every moment and the peace it brought. The quiet mornings, the hard but satisfying work, and the long evenings when you could look up and see the stars. You didn't have to race against time or worry about what was next. Instead, you spent time on the simple things. Taking care of plants, talking to neighbors, and enjoying a meal with your family. Those were the moments that we often miss or forget about these days. And as you did all that, you remembered the stories your grandparents told about the people who came before, about the generations who had lived through much tougher times. Those stories taught you about being strong, but they also reminded you of how valuable it was to live a slow and peaceful life. In today's crazy and stressful world, you suddenly felt lucky to be living in such a peaceful place. Like a cycle, everything went back to the beginning. You woke up, worked, and then rested, ready for the next day. Even though life had its challenges, you never felt alone. Your loved ones, friends in the village, and even nature itself were always there to encourage you. So, no matter how hard things got, you could always find joy in the simple moments. And when night came, when you lay back on your bed, you'd realize that there were things that would always be a part of your life, no matter what. That was the quiet, the peace, and the feeling of knowing that you'd done your best. As the day faded and the sky turned a light purple, a feeling of peace settled over everything. A gentle breeze came through the open windows, bringing the cool night air. You weren't rushing to do anything. Felt like everything was done. All the work for the day was taken care of. Evenings like that were for you to sit back, take a deep breath, and just feel the quiet all around you. Then, like always, you and your family would gather around the warm fire, enjoying simple but heartfelt food. Maybe some warm red bean porridge, freshly baked bread that smelled amazing, and hearing all the latest stories from the villagers. They were simple moments, but they were precious, and you knew that nothing could replace them. As everyone chatted, you'd start thinking about the people who had lived there before. The people who had built the community, leaving their mark on every house, every road, and every field. You didn't know exactly who they were, but the stories your grandparents and parents had told you and the things they'd left behind, like old graves or buildings, showed that they had been there. You couldn't go back in time, but you felt connected to those people, feeling their footsteps on the land, and it made you proud. You didn't feel sorry for them. You respected them. They had gone through tough times, but they had stayed strong and kept loving. And on nights like that, when everyone had gone to sleep, you had more time to think about what you had done during the day. You realized that even though life might be hard, you were doing your part to make the world a little better. You weren't a hero or anything, but you were an important part of the community, and that made you feel at peace. At the same time, you started to feel tired from working all day. Every step you took was slower, but lighter too. You smiled, feeling the warm blanket wrapped around you. Another night had come, and you'd fall asleep again after working hard for months. It wasn't a light sleep. It was deep and peaceful. You weren't afraid of anything because you knew that tomorrow would bring familiar work, good conversations, and simple moments like those. And you'd keep working, keep helping yourself and the people around you. In the quiet darkness, you'd remember the stories your grandparents had told you, stories about people who had overcome hardships. Even though they were gone, the values they had taught you lived on in your heart, people you could never forget. Every time you thought about them, you felt a deep connection to the land. The soft moonlight would shine through the small window, lighting up the rough wooden walls of the house. The sound of insects in the fields would be a steady hum, like a lullaby, putting you to sleep. But before you could even dream, you'd hear a knock on the door, not too loud, but enough to wake you up. A neighbor would come to you for help. Their cow was about to have a calf, and everyone in the village knew that you had a knack for helping animals give birth. So, you'd quickly throw on your wool sweater, grab an oil lamp, and walk with your neighbor through the dark mist. Life back then didn't wait until morning. Everything needed to be taken care of right away, whether it was the middle of the night, raining, or freezing cold. You didn't do it for a reward. You did it because that's what people did for each other. The village was like a family, where everyone helped each other out. Late at night, you might be a farmer, a doctor, a guard, or a caretaker, all in one. When you got to your neighbor's house, you'd see their whole family worried. The cow was breathing hard, looking like it was in a lot of pain. No one would say anything, just the light from the lamp would show the sweat on their faces. You'd gently walk over and whisper a few words to the person and the animal. It wasn't the first time, but it still felt nerve-wracking. A few minutes later, with lots of heavy breathing, a small calf would be born. Everyone would sigh with relief, and then you'd start to hear laughter. You wouldn't say much, just put your hand on the calf to check its heartbeat, then stand up and brush yourself off, like a doctor who had just finished a job. The mother of the family would offer you a warm cup of thyme tea, as a thank you. You couldn't refuse, so you'd take a sip, feeling the light, refreshing taste. In moments like that, you'd realize that everything, from the birth of a cow to drinking a cup of tea, was part of the cycle of life. Then you'd go home when it was almost dawn. A few stars would still be twinkling in the sky. As you walked through the door, you'd hear the familiar creak of the floor, like the house was welcoming you back. You'd lie down again, pull the blanket up, and close your eyes, feeling the warmth and the slow beat of your heart. Whether it was the middle of the night or dawn, you still had a role to play in that little world. No titles, no medals, just being there when others needed you. Sometimes, just to hold someone's hand, or help a newborn calf stand up. Historians still argue about whether rural communities in the Middle Ages were really that close. Some say that many villages were often divided by jealousy and fighting. But if you live in a small community, without electricity, phones, or ambulances, you'll understand that no one can survive alone. And without any written rules, you know that you're living among strong relationships. You'd smile softly, and then sleep would come, as slow as snowflakes falling on the roof, as long as a yawn at the end of the night. The next morning, you wouldn't wake up to an alarm clock. There was no such thing in your village. You'd wake up to the rooster crowing and the sound of wooden wheels in the distance. Light would be shining through the window, letting you know it was time to start a new day. You'd stretch, feeling a bit tired from the night. But that was normal. The first thing you'd do was check the mousetrap. It wasn't as fun as planting trees or baking bread, but the reality was that mice could ruin everything you'd worked so hard to grow. And if you were lucky, you'd have a little more meat for lunch. Rat meat wasn't exactly a delicacy, but in the cold winter months, you learned to appreciate anything you could eat. Scholars still argue about how common it was to eat rat meat back then, but maybe it just depended on how desperate you were. Then you'd have to get the fire going again. You'd use dry rags and a bit of straw to get the embers burning. You'd blow gently, like you were whispering to a child. As the fire grew, the light would shine on the wooden wall, making shadows that danced like ghosts. You wouldn't be afraid. It was a sign of life. You'd make a simple breakfast. Maybe a piece of stale bread soaked in warm water with a little honey if you had any. The smell of wheat would make your stomach growl. A friend once joked that the best breakfast was when you were really hungry and didn't have any other choices. You'd laugh because it was true. Outside, the morning mist would still be thick. You'd wrap a scarf around your head and put on your warmest coat. A wool coat that had been patched over and over. Each patch was a story. As you stepped out of the house, you'd hear neighbors calling to each other. Even though they didn't have to say it, everyone knew who would be doing what that day. The work had been planned out for generations. You'd go to the field, where the wheat fields stretched out like waves in the ocean. Under your feet was mud with that familiar smell. The smell that you only find in places that have been plowed for a long time. You'd start with the hoe, lifting it up and down like a heartbeat. You once dreamed of working with machines like people did these days, but you also understood that those hand movements helped you connect with the land, with your ancestors, and with yourself. An old man, the oldest in the village with a white beard, would come up to you and tell you about a harvest from long ago, when locusts had come and eaten everything. We had to roast the locusts and eat them. They were crunchy and helped us feel less hungry, he'd say and laugh. You'd laugh too, not sure if it was because of the story or the way he told it. Historians still argue about whether people back then were happier in those close-knit communities. There was evidence of famine, disease, and unfair treatment. But there were also stories about people helping each other out, about laughter echoing even in the darkest nights. And when you looked around, where there were people who would help you rebuild your house after a storm, or bring you turnips when your harvest was bad, you'd feel like you weren't alone. You'd keep working until the sun was high in the sky. Then you'd take a break under an old oak tree. A cool breeze would blow through, carrying the smell of dry straw and weeds. You'd lie down, resting your head on your arms, closing your eyes for a few minutes. For a moment, you'd forget the back pain, the hunger, and the tiredness. There was just you, the trees, and the earth. A peaceful moment that didn't need a phone or social media. The bell from the village church would ring, not for a service, but just to mark midday. You'd get up from the tree, brush off your clothes, and start walking back to the village, where a simple lunch would be waiting. On the way back, you'd see kids playing knights and dragons, with tree branches as swords and a wooden bucket as a helmet. You'd smile. Imagination was the one thing that they always had plenty of. Your lunch, as usual, would be simple. Barley porridge cooked with turnips and a little lard left over from the last slaughter. There were no spices other than salt and dried garlic, but when you were hungry and it was cold, you'd feel like it was a feast. Maybe you wouldn't be able to survive a day in the Middle Ages if you were too used to pizza and bubble tea. But there, you'd learn to love simplicity. You'd wash the dishes by the stream, the water so cold that your hands would go numb. An old woman stood next to me, reminiscing about her youth. She said they used to use ash to clean their pots and pans back then, and with a bit of elbow grease they'd gleam like new. She let out a hearty laugh, the kind that comes from deep within. To me, ash is just something you toss in the trash. But out here, nothing goes to waste. The afternoons were reserved for odd jobs. Patching up torn clothes, weaving baskets, or, if you had the knack for it, crafting pottery. My chore for the day was fetching water from the village well. That stone well had been there for centuries, with a wooden pulley that let out a loud groan every time you hauled up the bucket. The water itself was sweet, cold, and crystal clear. I took a small sip before filling the bucket, sighing with a quiet sense of contentment. On my way back, I heard singing coming from the village bakery. A middle-aged woman was kneading dough, humming an old folk song as she worked. The lyrics told the tale of a young woman who ran off with a blacksmith, only to be caught and locked away in a bell tower. "Is that story true?" I asked. She just winked at me. Like all love stories, whether it's fact or fiction, what matters is the feeling it gives you. Historians still argue about how much freedom women actually had back in the Middle Ages. Some sources claim they were shackled by marriage and religion. But you can also find documents showing they were involved in trade, manufacturing, and sometimes even held leadership positions in smaller communities. As usual, the real truth is buried somewhere in between the musty pages of history books. The afternoon crept by slowly, and the sky started to darken, not because of rain, but because winter was on its way. The sun was setting earlier, and a thin mist was already settling over the thatched roofs. I hurried out to the field to gather a few more turnips and onions before it got completely dark. As I bent down, I heard a rustling sound nearby. A field mouse scurried away, dragging a half-eaten tuber with it. I wasn't angry, just muttered, "Leave some for me, will you?" Back at the house, I stoked the fire, and the flickering light danced on the wooden wall, illuminating a few charcoal drawings hanging there. One was a slightly clumsy drawing of St. George slaying the dragon. I knew my cousin had drawn it last year. Here, art didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to bring a smile or fill a lazy afternoon. Outside, I heard a dog barking, followed by the sound of horses passing by. A stranger was visiting the village, bringing news from the nearby town. Maybe a fair was coming, or a new tax decree from the Lord. I didn't really care much because that usually meant we had to work harder and eat less. In the evening, we had a dinner similar to lunch. A thick porridge, seasoned with a few herbs quickly picked from the garden. Then we sat by the fire with our family, sharing ghost stories and love stories. One person told a tale of the ghost of a young woman wandering along the riverbank on a moonlit night. Another elaborated on the story of a missing hunter and giant animal footprints. I giggled, not because I believed it, but because these stories helped me feel alive and connected. Before heading to bed, I went outside to look at the sky. The moon was full and high, casting a cold light on the thatched roof, making everything look hazy and dreamlike. I took a deep breath, then quietly went back inside, crawled under the blanket made of coarse wool and dry straw. Tomorrow would start just like this again. It wasn't quite dawn yet, but the rooster's crow had already echoed throughout the village, like a synchronized biological clock. I opened my eyes in the dim light. The coarse wool blanket was still damp with dew, and the cold air from the earthen floor seeping through the cracks in the door made me shiver. Next to me, someone was snoring softly, a steady rhythm like a lullaby. If I didn't have to get up and start a new day, I would have lazed in bed a little longer. But work was calling. I dragged myself out of bed, tiptoed across the rough wooden floor, and stepped into the yard. It was still covered in dew, and the sun was still hidden behind the dark clouds. But the cow I looked after was already standing there waiting, eyes half closed, slowly chewing dry grass as if to say, "You slept long enough." I responded with an ear scratch, then got the bucket ready and started milking. A stream of warm white milk flowed into the wooden bucket, making a steady, soft sound, like the first song of my day. Breakfast was a piece of stale bread dipped in warm, fresh cow's milk. I felt lucky to get some protein and calcium, a real luxury for the average medieval farmer, especially in winter. While I was chewing the bread, I overheard my foster father telling a story about when he was young. He had been caught stealing chicken eggs before Easter, and his mother kicked him out into the rain in the middle of the night. Medieval people had a special connection with food. It wasn't just a source of life, but also tied to religion and social class. Only the nobility could regularly eat meat. Commoners mainly relied on black bread, porridge, and vegetables. Even so, they were sometimes surprisingly creative. For example, a porridge made from wheat, mixed with milk and rose water, was once a specialty in certain regions. Historians still argue whether the floral scent was used to mask any bad smells. After breakfast, I was sent to the village healer's house not to get treatment, but to help him gather herbs. The healer was the most mysterious person in the area. Old, with hair as tangled as a bird's nest, and always carrying a leather bag filled with strange items, from tree roots to fox teeth. He had me dry sage leaves, finely chop willow bark, and label pottery jars containing murky liquids. "This one is for swollen feet. As for that one, don't open it unless you want to smell hell," he winked. I sneaked a peek at the fabric map hanging on the wall. It wasn't a geographical map, but a map of the body, where human parts were linked to constellations. "The liver is related to Venus. The stomach is the moon," the healer whispered, as if I was listening to an old song. These days, people would call this superstition or pseudoscience, but back then, it was medicine. In the early afternoon, I returned to the village, carrying some rosemary branches and a bag of wood ash, which was said to cure coughs if you sprinkled it into your shoes before going to sleep. On the way, I passed the small school at the monastery. The sound of children chanting Latin prayers echoed, along with the sound of the stern monk's ruler. I thought back to my modern school days, complaining about white boards without markers, and suddenly a wooden ruler didn't seem so bad. Tonight was the small market day in the village. A few peddlers from the next village brought salt, honey, fabric scraps, and some wonky pottery. I didn't have much to trade but a few onions, but I still wandered among the stalls, just to take in the smell of baked honey and listen to a stranger strumming a guitar. Suddenly, a group of young people gathered around an elderly man who was telling a story in a deep voice. It was a story about a night lost in a haunted forest, where the tree branches talked and the darkness had shape. I squeezed in to listen, not because I believed it, but because his storytelling voice was like a soft, comfortable pillow, and it almost made me fall asleep right there in the crowded village market. When I got back home, I realized I was covered in dirt and smelled like burnt grass. They were the marks of a long day, but no 2 days were ever the same. I washed my face with rainwater I'd collected in a jar, then changed into my linen sleep clothes. There was no lotion or scented candles, just the cold wind blowing in from the unclosed wooden window. But as I lay down, my head resting on a straw-filled pillow, my eyes closed gently. Another day had passed in a world not made for me, and somehow we were still alive. The cooing of a dove echoed softly in the distance, announcing a new dawn. But today felt different, not because the sky was clearer. Actually, dark clouds were gathering overhead, and a light mist clung to the windowsill. No, today felt different because I had a big job to do. I had to deliver a letter to the local lord's castle. I put on my thickest cloak, tightened my leather belt, and stepped out onto the damp dirt road of the village. The castle was about an hour's walk, if I could avoid the 7 sheep, the muddy stream, and the sleepy guard at the village outpost, who always asked the same question, "Anything new?" Even though he never seemed to be happy with the answer. The road to the castle twisted and turned through fields of golden wheat, past clumps of dark trees, and near a few isolated huts where poor people lived in seclusion. I suddenly felt like a minor character wandering through a painted backdrop of a role-playing game, except I was missing the soundtrack and the health bar above my head. When I got there, the castle wasn't as impressive as I'd imagined. It wasn't some Versailles palace, but a gray stone building with chunky watchtowers and mud-caked walls. The gatekeeper looked me up and down with a suspicious glare before letting me through the heavy wooden gate. "Don't stare at the West Tower," he warned, without explaining why, and I didn't, because nobody wants trouble out west. Inside, I was led to the main hall, where the Lord himself was sitting. He was a man with a beard as thick as burnt grass and eyes that seemed to calculate the tax value of every breath. He was drinking beer in the morning. I handed him the letter, bowed like I was told to, and quietly stepped back after he gave a slight nod. "Tell the person who wrote this to use better ink next time," he grumbled. While I was waiting, I had a chance to look at the castle more closely. The murals were faded, the plaster was peeling, and the air smelled like a mix of cured meat, wet dog fur, and dampness from the stone walls. The dining hall was big but cold, with a large fireplace blazing. Servants were running around, bringing hot food to the noble family. Venison pies, boiled turnips, and some strange broth that I thought had star anise floating in it. A woman, probably the lady of the house, walked past me in a gown loaded with gold thread and looked at me like I was a section of wall that hadn't been dusted yet. I gave a small smile, but she only gave a quick nod before disappearing behind a velvet curtain. Historians still argue about whether noblewomen in the Middle Ages really had the freedom they show in history books, or if they were just characters in stories written by male historians. Either way, I couldn't exactly ask her, so I just remembered her look. Before I left, I was invited to a meal for visitors. It was a thin soup with a few stale bread crusts floating in it, a slice of hard cheese, and a weak beer that barely wet my whistle. After spending the morning walking through forests and fields, my feet were killing me. But, deep down, I knew this was a privilege because so many people would never get the chance to step inside the castle's gates. When I got back to the village, I realized everything was exactly the same as it had been before. The smoke from the evening fires still drifted lazily from the thatched roofs. The children were still chasing each other, laughing and playing by the small stream. The old folks were still sitting in front of their houses, telling old stories about when they were young and could run faster than hunting dogs. But I was different now. I had been in the center of power, a place that wasn't as grand or exciting as people thought, but was actually full of contradictions, was very cold, and, in some ways, pretty disappointing. Night was coming, slowly and quietly. I sat by the flickering fire, listening to the wood crackling, watching the flames dance and reflect on the familiar faces of the people I had thought were ordinary. But now I realized each of them had their own story, a life full of good and bad times. One of them spoke up, saying that their great-grandfather had once been a bugler for a group of knights, but he was allergic to pollen, so he accidentally blew the wrong signal during an important battle, causing big problems. I smiled a little, then curled up in my warm blanket. My body ached, not just from the long day, but also because I was living in a world where everything had become difficult, heavy, and very tough. And I still had a long night ahead. And now, as darkness covered that old world, I slowly left the land of muddy-handed farmers, cold stone castles, and damp mornings filled with the sound of church bells. My breathing started to slow down, as steady as the distant sound of horses' hooves fading into the night mist. The scenery faded, like a painting that had faded over the years. The trees were just light gray lines. The wind gently rustled through the leaves, carrying a soft whisper of time. I didn't have to worry or think about throwing away trash, clearing sewers, or stale bread crusts anymore. No more busy schedules to race against. No more phones ringing in my ears. Just me and the distant sounds, echoing from an old time, as gentle as a lullaby. Under the soft blanket, I slowly forgot the musty smell of straw, forgot the cold, calculating look of the noble ladies, and forgot the back pain from the hard wooden bed. All my worries and fears slowly disappeared into nothing, like fog disappearing after sunrise, leaving only my breath, gentle and steady. Everything is okay now, everything is calm now. I wish you a deep, restful night. Good night. Yeah, good night.